Hey, Canada, politicians and the rhetoric, right? They talk out both sides of the mouth, some of them at the same time. They're that skilled in the art of deception and lying, right? What this particular video is going to be touching down on, and it's a topic that's been covered in a couple of our media outlets, but it's the whole idea, the whole concept of free trade. Well, what's free trade? Like I say, like I always do, is let's define the terms. In reality, I don't even have to look to a dictionary because I know what free trade means. It means no restrictions, no tariffs, no barriers, no excise taxes, no any kind of taxes, right? Free trade is free trade. In other words, we trade with each other voluntarily, and there isn't some overarching or central planning entity that gets to have any say in that, right? That's what free trade means. In Canada, you have Mr. Trudeau there. Oh, such a fail. Oh, what was he, a drama fucking school drama teacher? And I mean, the son of a former prime minister of Canada, you know. This is someone that obviously has no clue about trade or business. It's as far removed from how he was raised that you could even imagine. But yet he constantly likes to talk up free trade, and this is all in reference to Donald Trump and his talk about, you know, coming down hard on the NAFTA agreements or tearing them up and rewriting them all together and coming up with bilateral agreements instead of this big overarching NAFTA, right? We try to put three different countries on the same level, which they're not economically and they're not philosophically. I mean, there's so many different reasons why you can't put everyone together, right? Without seeing some major discrepancies and pitfalls that happen as a result of that. But in Canada, the Americans are way better at it, even though they have their own protectionism bullshit, regulations and barriers and tariffs and all kinds of things that prevent actual real trade from happening within their own country in the 48 mainland states and the two other states, Alaska and Hawaii, right? Or even the territories, Puerto Rico and such. But in Canada, we don't even have free trade in our provinces, like interprovincial trade, just within the country of Canada. So any guise or any pretense, that's another thing. There's no, like, when you talk about capitalism, capitalism is supposed to be meant by free markets and private individuals. What you're looking at today is more along the lines of corporatism, right? When government gets to control and dictate trade and how that happens and how that functions. That's not capitalism. That's state capitalism, which is just another term for cronyism, or even to some degree, fascism. Socialism, you know, there's many different iterations that social and economic policies are tied in together. But in reality, free trade on its own is just allowing people to trade freely. That's right, free trade. And again, and I know this first and foremost, even when I hauled into the U.S., it was easy. You just buy if you smoke cigarettes or drink alcohol, you buy that at the border at the duty-free store. And you get it much cheaper because you're not paying duty and taxes and all these things. So that's the one. But once again, it's still under the privy of being controlled by government mandates and edicts. But that was actually much easier, and I saved a whole lot more money doing it that way than even just, perfect example is crossing into New Brunswick. From the U.S., you cross from Maine. From Canada, you cross from Quebec. Those are the two provinces. You know, if you're coming from the west side of the country of Canada or U.S., or even on the east side, I mean, the two ways into New Brunswick was through Quebec, right? Or through the U.S., through Maine. And it was actually, I was always much more beneficial. I was always much better off to cross back into Canada from the U.S., where I could buy, I think it was like $17.99. This has been a few years ago, mind you, but still, it wasn't that long ago. It was but $17.99, I believe, for a carton of cigarettes and maybe $15.99 for a case of beer, 24 beer. Whereas if you did that same thing and crossed into Quebec, into New Brunswick, even though the drinks in Quebec are cheaper, because the New Brunswick government has barriers set up to prevent you from buying it other than maybe one case, right, or something. But there are barriers even just to purchase things in Canada in different provinces that prohibit any kind of free trade from happening even from province to province. And I just used one small example of the alcohol. But at least then, even with all the taxes and all the other extra bullshit and the layers of bureaucracy that's put on top of our consumption of these substances, even that was still cheaper than going into New Brunswick. But because, and we've known about this gentleman that got charged, the New Brunswick government used an old law, because like I say, there's no free trade in Canada. They used an old law to punish a guy for buying multiple cases of alcohol still in the country of Canada, but bring it across one provincial border to another. He was penalized as if he was traveling between different countries. Actually worse than if he was traveling between different countries to a certain extent, right? So once again, where's this pretense of free trade even interprovincially? Well, it doesn't exist. That is something that we should all get on board. I mean, even if you know, whatever your thoughts or your concepts regarding the NAFTA agreements, or agreements with the European Union, or any of the, like the TPP, regardless of that, as a Canadian, right, don't you think it would be beneficial for all of our provinces to be able to trade their products, their services, their raw materials without any barriers? That's kind of the whole pretense of how this country was set up. That's why they all amalgamated into one big federalized country of Canada, was the pretense of free trade. But once again, we realize that politicians, central planners, control freaks always find ways to circumvent and to negate those things that free us up, that free us up from being able to trade, barter, and negotiate with people from different provinces. Canadians would be much better off. They'd have a lot more money left in their pockets, even though the government steals a lot of it, well, more than food, housing, and clothing combined, right? But even with all that left, Canadians would still be much better off if, at the very least, the governments would stop stealing from them more by interprovincial trade barriers. I mean, come on, it's still staying within the country. Take your hands off, loosen the grip of power when it comes to interprovincial trade. At the very least, give Canadians the ability to, be more competitive in the marketplace, in the world marketplace. And interprovincial trade, taking down those barriers, would greatly help that come to fruition. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.